Welcome to Vis-a-Vis. My name is Voigt, and my today's guest is a publicist, political activist and analyst, Wall Street investor. He works with the leading American non-governmental organizations striving for transparency in the public sector, and upon the project Veritas that involves investigating the frauds in politics and society. Also known for his famous father, Leopold Tyrmand, a very famous novelist and anti-communist activist. Welcome, Matthew Tyrmand. What is it about this country, about this land, that make you come back so often?
Well, the food mostly. No. Obviously, there's a strong family historical connection. I've been coming here for now almost 10 years, but I feel very connected and very at home in this place. I've just been deeply engaged since I started coming here, since I started writing, since I started analyzing the political situation here. When I left Wall Street in 2011 and I was doing all these different things, and I started coming back here more and writing more and getting into both political activism and political journalism, editorializing on stuff, especially here. It just kind of swept me into all the complexes that need some analysis and needs a tough pen to critique the pitfalls. Certainly the political system here, I'm sure we'll discuss, is complex, and that's my beat. There's so much nuance to it. So I like being deeply engaged in it, and it's gotten me more deeply engaged in Europe as a bit of an activist, not just in Poland, but in a whole bunch of other countries.
Well, you can work remotely too, right?
Well, I work from this thing right here, so I'm just constantly on this, and the beauty of modern communications and technology, I can rotate between the four cities I pretty much live in, which are New York, Chicago, here in Warsaw, and DC, because I'm there so often, and I can never really miss a beat, either the news or the conversations and communicating, posting whatever I want to post, whether it's social media or written pieces for any one of a number of outlets, both Polish and English language. There's a lot of opportunity to weigh in, and I think that over the years, since I wrote these couple of books early on that got me into sort of the public debate here, I think that my viewpoint is appreciated. It's a little bit more nuanced given the depth of engagement I have with American politics on the right, especially this administration, the movement that swept both Europe and the US that I write about all the time.
And you support.
And I support 100%. It's never perfect, nothing's perfect, but by and large, I'm pretty happy with the directions, the trends that are occurring in Poland, in Europe, and in the US, UK, all places I deeply engage. So I'm very, very occupied with a lot of things to do and to talk about, to analyze economically and politically here. What's going right is that there is a global populist nationalist trend. The words are often conflated and mixed together in different ways, usually with the pejorative attached. The global media complex that's been existent for several decades. The ivory tower academic elite journalist class are very hostile to what's going on in Poland and Hungary. In the rest of Europe now, with this recent EU election, where the populists and nationalists are gaining ground, in the US with Trump, the elite, their heads are exploding. Are you
satisfied with the results?
Yeah, very. I would have liked to see in the election on May 26th, 30+% Eurosceptics, because any power structure that's left without a check goes too far, and that's what we've seen with the European Union. They call it, harmonization and integration and cohesion, and those are very nice sounding words, but they belie a deeper level of sovereign breakdown that I think most citizens of Europe, these are citizens of nation states, did not sign on for. They thought they were getting an economic trade pact where you had the free movement of goods, services, people, and capital, human capital and capital, and those are admirable dynamics that you want to introduce bilaterally, multilaterally, but it rather ran amok. And I always say that in the 70s, when they were devising the exchange rate mechanism, they knew that they were the political class in Brussels, in London to some degree, Paris and Berlin certainly. I always look at the EU as a French philosophical project and a German economic project. They knew they'd have sort of a sleeper cell into breaking down sovereignty, breaking down the borders, And people identify, yes, you do come across, especially in the elite, especially the global media elite or the European elite, when you ask them where you're from, they'll say Europe. But they're in the vast minority. The vast majority of people say, I'm a Belgian, I'm French, I'm a German, I'm a Pole, I'm a Hungarian, I'm an Italian.
Well, I would say it depends on where you are.
Yeah, look, if you're in Brussels, this is a little different than if you're in, Bruges and Ghent.
Depends who asks.
Yeah, totally. But that's part of the complex, and that's part of what is getting a little bit of a backslide in a positive way. Sliding back toward what I call the Westphalian order. I've written about this in depth. Europe became really successful post the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 that ended the 30 Years' War. This was the first time there was a codification among nation states on the continent to recognize each other's sovereign statehood and not to intercede in each other's domestic affairs. If that incursion did occur, it would lead to war. It did. It wasn't like there was no bloodshed from post 1648. That would be simplifying things. But what the Westphalian Order did was it really brought nation-state sovereignty as an ideal for European nations, because these nations are comprised of people of similar culture. One of the reasons the EU project is so flawed is because it was tied together with a common currency, and a currency in its real term represents the economic prospects of a country. And the economics of the countries in the South, Greece, Portugal, Spain, are very different than the industrial countries of Benelux or Germany. Or then now you had the integration of Central European post-Soviet Iron Curtain nations, also very differing in their industries, differing in their economic growth rates, their home ownership, and their mortgage ability to take out mortgages to own homes at higher rates. All these things differ, and a currency ideally should reflect that. The euro flies in the face of that, and that's why you've had this supranational governance to keep it alive. Greece, 2011-12 being the greatest example, when the post-American contagion of bad debt, of loose lending standards in the U.S. was also very prevalent in Europe. Mostly the German banks were making loans to those in Florida, Nevada, or California that so grossly overbuilt and did not accept the market's credit and pricing mechanisms of risk control. And that was political. Same thing in Europe. And then you have this crisis that developed on the balance sheets of especially the German banks, but the developed industrial nation banks of many of the northern European nations, and who came in to clean it up? Well, they created this construct called the Troika, which was the ECB, the EU, and the IMF. And they basically abrogated Greek sovereignty when Greece went to the elections. They wouldn't accept an election that ended in an outcome of someone or some party that was looking to exit. Grexit was a thing in 2012. Exit the EU, which would have destroyed German banks, German banking balance sheets. Right now, we see the results. Deutsche Bank is on a path to insolvency as we speak. They're frantically trying to figure out how to what they call ring fence the bad assets, the bad debt, so that it doesn't take down the whole bank. Well, this is from Greece, this is from Spain, this is from Portugal, this is from Italy as well. And they were the ones who made these loans with very little risk management attached to them. And it was a way of creating an economic hegemony, or embedding even deeper the German economic hegemony with little thought to the after effect of bad risk management. Well, they basically owned the risk managers in the EU. So instead of the German banks being held accountable, there's a great quote that capitalism without bankruptcy is like Christianity without hell. No accountability, and what you had was the German banks didn't want to be accountable, so they hijacked the political system with the Troika.
So who takes the accountability?
The people. We're seeing it right now. We saw it in 2015 when AfD made the European Parliament, when Le Pen's party had a pretty dominant showing that was just repeated this cycle. The people are saying, and now you have Euroscepticism rising from. On the last European Parliament, it was 15 to 20%. Now it's 25%. I thought it could get up to 30%. It didn't. The anti-establishment Greens took a lot of share from some of the establishment parties in Germany, the Union, the CDU, CSU. The Social Democrats and the Laborites of Europe got handed to them as well, asses handed to them as well, because they're also the establishment left now. I mean, it's interesting to see the SDP in Germany, which is a hard socialist party that dates back to the time of Marx in Germany. I mean, this is a party that's been around for 150 years, and they're basically eviscerated now. Same thing with the Tories and Labour in the UK, totally eviscerated.
Do you see a new movement coming to Europe?
No, I see a continuation of trend that's been validated. I wrote a big piece for Human Events, a relaunch of Reagan's old favorite conservative news weekly. It's a great piece. It was put together, the outlet itself, Human Events, by Raheem Kassam, who is Nigel Farage's deputy at UKIP and Steve Bannon's deputy at Breitbart, was editor-in-chief of Breitbart London. And it's very focused on this sort of global nationalist populism that is continuing to accelerate. This recent election is validating it. AfD has increased their mandate. Le Pen and Front National eviscerated the sitting French president, Macron. They spoke up for the yellow vests, who were totally just blown by, moved to the side of considerations by the French elite. They just didn't care that the working class are marching in the street over things like gas taxes and just the quality of life that's not increasing as the elite quality of life does. So, Macron just ignored them first, then he condemned them, then he turned the hoses on them, and then he embraced them with weeks left until the election, but it was too late, and it was purely a political move, and people saw that. So he's the party of bankers and elites, and Le Front National, which believes in borders and believes in a Europe of individual nation states, as well as the competition that's needed for the French people to succeed, and it's manifested in their complaint with the yellow vests. They spoke for them. And that really, it manifested in the electoral result in France. Italy, Salvini's becoming certainly the most powerful politician in Italy.
How do you perceive the five-star coalition
I think it's really interesting because you've got a anti-establishment nationalist populist right, and you've got an anti-establishment populist almost green left with Beppe Grillo's five-star, and Salvini is the Northern League, which is, in its history is, Northern Italy, the industrial base of Italy, the economically productive base of Italy, the more economically ingrained within trade networks of Europe. Salvini is the one who's really put this together, and even though he's deputy prime minister, and that's again a result of Brussels not willing to accept him as the de facto leader of the country. Well, they're not. It's like holding your hand against a wall as the ocean, comes in. They may be able to stave off for a certain amount of time these dynamics, but they're accelerating. I mean, the people are fed up. Salvini's a perfect manifestation thereof. He is certainly the most powerful politician in Italy, even though on title he's just deputy PM, not PM. But he is absolutely remaking the Italian political scene as well as the European. Him and Le Pen, Farage in the UK, in Spain, there's a populist movement growing. In Sweden, the Swedish Democrats. Spain, it's Vox and Espinosa. In Belgium, Forum for Democracy, Thierry Baudet and Dirk Epping's party is doing very, very well. They got 3 seats in the election. A Eurosceptic, nationalist, populist party that's going to be caucusing in the ECR with Law and Justice. All these things are continuing on trend. They're not going to be slowing down anytime soon. People are very, very hesitant to give up their freedom, and they see what the EU's done the last 15, 20 years, and they're fighting back, which is good. Sovereignty does matter to people on the ground, even if the global elites don't give a crap.
Could you explain me better what is the populism?
Populism is the will of the people. The will of the people over a usually self-selected cabal cohort of elite, whether it's the ivory tower academic elite, the media elite, the political elite, the business elite. In Germany, it's funny to see, usually the business elite are much more focused toward markets. In Germany, they're much more focused toward social justice. They're much more focused toward, the same center-left themes that you would think that they would be in opposition to. But it's been very good to the German business elite, because by breaking down national borders across Europe, the German business culture is so strong that they benefit at a much higher rate than most of the other constituent member states. So populism is just strictly definitionally the will of the people over the will of the elite, and where the media likes to make it a pejorative, a negative word, it just shows you how out of touch they are and how they do not trust the people. They, one of my intellectual idols, William F. Buckley, said that I would rather take the first 200 names in the Boston phone book to form the government than the Harvard faculty lounge. 100% concur with that. The Harvard faculty lounge is, cloistered, where they're unaccountable, the way Merkel was with her decision-making on borders and migrant resettlement. Unaccountable to the decisions they make. The people it affects have to deal with it, and the people are really wizened up. It's not coincident that we're one generation in to when the internet was really consummated and the barriers to entry for distributing information was broken down. You didn't just have the New York Times and Le Monde and the BBC and Der Spiegel or whoever else, or Vis-a-Vis here, delivering all the news that's fit to print, and thus having the power of curation and selection to try and form the narratives that they want to politically put forward. You have a million competitive sources of information. Social media has made that even greater, amplified that. Those voices, individual voices, are able, if they're competitive. Look at Paul Joseph Watson in the UK.
Well, in the age of internet, I would say every voice matters.
Yeah. And
right.
The good voices will rise to the top, as opposed to the curation of voices that would occur in a closed system, which is what it was for so long. So you've got like Paul Joseph Watson, who's he does video, sort of like little individual video type podcasts commenting about what's going on, and he's resonated a lot. He's done great. He gets millions, tens of millions of views. So what's the answer from the elite? They're now deplatforming him, blocking him, Facebook, Twitter, Medium, whatever, YouTube, whatever else. They've already demonetized those who they're hostile to, so they cannot make a career out of putting forward their views and their ideas, because the leftist and establishment elite and the left and right elite are rather closely, I view them almost all as center left when they claim to be center right. A lot of them, like the European People's Party, the CDU, CSU Union, they say they're center right. PO claims to be center right. There's nothing center right about PO. This is a far left political framework they're putting forward, from sovereignty to social issues. So I always joke that for PO, Platforma Obywatelska, the only thing center right about them is the side of the road their taxpayer supplied chauffeurs drive them on. They're not center right. They're pretty far left by any rational standards of the political debate.
Would you draw a distinction between right wing and left wing?
Yes. Now it's less economic, unfortunately. Historically it was economic. Left wing was more socialist, right wing was more free market, at least in the US and parts of Europe, pockets of the European political debate. Central Europe, right and left, they're all socialists, because coming out of communism, it still needs a couple generations of trial and error and education to develop the right market orientations. But it's really on social policy and culture and tradition, and wrapped up in that now is the border debate. Is, do you have a country if you don't have a border? Open society types, globalists who want to break down borders, the George Soros and web of his think tanks, for instance, they believe that they will eradicate war by making some sort of global utopia where nation states don't really exist. There's just one global nation state that is managed by a technocratic elite, the Harvard Faculty Lounge, Anne Applebaum or her idiot husband. They get to pull the levers of political power, academic power, media power, commercial power, and business elite power, and they've gotten thwacked. I always look at Anne Applebaum as the perfect cautionary tale. She has citizenship in 3 nations that I'm aware of: Poland, UK, and US. She grew up in the US. She's married to Radek Sikorski, who's a Pole and a Brit, and she's deeply involved in all 3 of these places. Her think tank work, her media work, whether it's the Telegraph, or Vis-a-Vis here, or in the US and the Washington Post, 3 of the most elitist, establishmentarian news outlets that all have a political agenda. And Telegraph, ostensibly center-right. Well, she lost in Brexit. She lost the EU elections here in 2015. They lost the national elections with PO.
Let's skip her.
But it's a perfect example.
Back to the theory.
But it's a perfect example of somebody embedded in this ivory tower who has lost the technocratic controls and levers of power that she was cultivating, both politically through her husband here, her connections in DC, and she's really angry and bitter. I saw her at a book signing once, and she started yelling, Russian troll, have him removed." Absolutely unhinged. I mean, everyone knows I'm not pro-Russia or a paid St. Petersburg troll factory denizen. I mean, I just have an opinion she disagrees with, so that means I must be a Russian troll. These people have lost their minds, and that reflects more and more to the people on the ground. They see it, they get it, and aside from the cloistered elite, they reject it, and I'm wholly happy about that.
Okay. You're investigating frauds in politics and society.
I try. Still alive, so.
What was the latest?
Well, I work with an organization in New York called Project Veritas, a guy named James O'Keefe, who basically rewrote the book on undercover journalism. There was a proud history of undercover journalism in America, the muckrakers of the turn of the 20th century into the teens and 20s and even 30s. Jacob Riis in the Lower East Side tenements, Nellie Bly, Upton Sinclair, who went undercover in Chicago's Union Stockyards, the major meat market, and showed that all of the stuff that was going on there was so offensive to just normal human standards, which ushered in the FDA. What Upton Sinclair did in the Union Stockyards paved the way for legislation to protect the consumer on really disgusting, non-hygienic meatpacking practices. So O'Keefe, and there's also this in Chicago in the Sun-Times, and there's been a great history. Mike Wallace and Arnold Diaz and even John C.
Answer my question.
I'm getting his background. And O'Keefe built an organization called Project Veritas, which equips undercover journalists to embed organizations, whether they be political campaigns or companies. And right now what we're really focused on, we did the media bit, CNN after Trump, the Washington Post, and saw how they were so biased that they claimed to be journalists, but they were just political activists. Now we're focused on big tech. We just had a story with Pinterest where they were selecting conservatives and blacklisting them, basically, based on their views. We've done this with YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. Twitter, we had a big story. We showed that Twitter was shadow banning conservatives. That was their internal term. They would shadow ban. They would put people who they disagreed with into a algorithm of shadow banning so that nobody would see when they tweet. So you'd have 100,000 followers, but you'd get 20 impressions. And so it's funny because that was discovered in January of 2018, and then I was shadow banned a few months later. I watched my impressions with five-figure following. I watched my impressions go from many hundreds of thousands to almost zero overnight. And of course they deny they're doing it, but we have them speaking into our button cams, admitting it, that they do this. We've got political stuff going on. We've embedded a lot of campaigns in the past and showed the hypocrisy of the institutional left. Democrats who would say one thing behind closed doors to donors, like we've had Democrats say, oh, well, we want to bankrupt the coal industry. And then they're saying to their constituents in places like Kentucky, where coal is a major driver, like Poland, of the energy and the economy, oh no, we have to protect coal. Coal's what keeps the lights on. So there's quite a disconnect by what they say in private to their fellow elites versus what they say to the masses. So it's that kind of work.
What happens next when you reveal such?
We call it taking scalps.
Things.
Usually people get fired. Ideally, we get people sent to jail for some of their shenanigans. But we call it taking scalps, and we've taken quite a few because we need there to be accountability. The mainstream media used to have this job. They were tasked in society with, the fourth estate, who's gonna watch over, the powers that be, and then it became who's gonna watch the watchers, and nobody. And that's where we came in. In Poland, I've certainly called out a lot of ugly political players. The corruption institutionally among PO was really, really, really bad. And look, there's corruption always in politics, and the right is not immune. And I've called out players on the right who I disagree with, who I think are heavy-handed or abrogate or breach their powers. They go beyond what the mandate of the Constitution would allow them to do. I think if people read my column over the last few years, they'd know I'm no fan of this justice minister, who I call
Tyrmand.
I call this justice minister, Ziobro, I call him the Książę Ciemności, the Prince of Darkness.
Right.
I think he's a really bad guy. I think he's not somebody who should give the portfolio of courts and prosecution.
Yet you still support
law and justice? Yeah.
Law and justice.
Well, I support Morawiecki. Most of all, I think he is an honest, intelligent,
but you can't
visionary.
only support one.
Well, and that's why. Look, you always have choices, and I have debates with a lot of my ideological friends in Washington and in the think tank world. They say, how can you support people who are so socialist, who are doing this, that, or the other? And same thing with Trump. I say, you know what? We need to win. Otherwise, we cannot cede ground to our ideological opponents simply because those who are our standard bearers, who are at the front of our battle, are not wholly acceptable on every single policy or philosophical framework. That's what losers do. And by the way,
are you able to disagree?
I disagree
openly.
Yeah, I mean, ask Law and Justice how big a fan they are of me. I think most of them are not.
Would you call yourself a lobbyist?
No, because I don't lobby. Lobbying is a very, very distinctive term. Lobbying means you act on behalf of somebody who's paying you to act on their behalf. And I've never taken a contract from anybody to act on their behalf. I work for nonprofits doing issue-based advocacy. I write articles and I speak. I never take speaking fees or fees for anything I write, with the exception of some small book advances on the 2 books I've written, and they did not cover the cost of travel to promote the hell out of those books.
What should we do to prevent from corruption?
The most important thing is that people are vigilant and they call it out. Instead of just the tribalism of politics left, right in this country and in Europe and in the US and globally in the developed world has gotten, it's gotten a lot worse. It's always been bad, but it's gotten worse. And so there's now a lot of willingness from citizens to look the other way about their guys and call out the other guys only. And that is a fallacious thing to do. It doesn't show intellectual integrity. It's hypocritical, and it only further allows these complexes to fester. I'm involved with a project in the U.S., a big data project called Open the Books, where we put all government spending online. Okay. And this is very constitutionally driven. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution in spending and government practice, I think, is manifold and needed greatly. In the U.S., we're fighting a good fight on this, and I think we're winning. The Constitution enables it with Article 1, Section 9 that says, the U.S. Constitution, that a periodic review and distribution of all of our expenditures, all of government's expenditures, will be made to the people. And this document was written in 1789. Now we're in the big data age, and we have the capacity to put all spending online in real time and to forensic audit the public sector, to crowdsource accountability. By putting the data out there, people can go, their states, their towns, counties, locales, school districts, whatever, and really dig deep and look into it, call it out. It's on the local level that you really understand the connections that breed corruption. Things like the mayor's brother-in-law's company got a contract. Was it competitively bid or not?
Thank you so much. The democracy must prevail.